There is a photograph that has been sitting quietly in the corner of the internet for decades. No filters, no staging, just a woman sitting alone in a hospital room, her famous hair gone, her eyes tired but completely steady, staring at something the camera could not catch. And when that image resurfaced in late 2025, something unexpected happened. People did not scroll past it. They stopped. They shared it. They cried over it. And then they started asking questions they had never thought to ask before. Not about the poster. Not about the hair. Not about Charlie's Angels. They started asking, who was she really, and what did Hollywood actually do to her? You might remember Farrah Fawcett as the woman on the wall. That red swimsuit. That smile that felt like it could light up a room from across the street. For an entire generation, she was not just famous. She was the definition of something. A feeling. A decade. A kind of beauty that the world had never quite seen packaged that way before. But here is what nobody told you back then, and what is only now coming fully into the light. Behind that smile was a woman fighting battles on so many fronts simultaneously that it would have broken most people completely. And the fact that it did not break her, that she kept standing, kept creating, kept pushing back against every single person who tried to reduce her to a surface, that is the reason everyone is suddenly talking about Farrah Fawcett again. Because the story you thought you knew is only a fraction of the real one. She came into the world on February 2, 1947, in Corpus Christi, Texas, as Mary Farrah Lenny Fawcett. Say that full name slowly for a moment. Mary Farrah Lenny. There is something in it that sounds almost like a prayer, and maybe that was fitting, because the world she was born into ran on faith and discipline and the quiet dignity of people who did not have much but carried themselves like they did. Her father, James Fawcett, worked oil rigs. Her mother, Pauline, kept the home. They were not wealthy people. They were steady people, and there is a difference. The streets of Corpus Christi in the late 40s and early 50s were narrow and warm and full of the kind of ordinary life that nobody makes movies about, which is exactly the kind of life that shapes extraordinary people in ways that fame never fully gets credit for. She attended St. Patrick's Roman Catholic School, and if you want to understand why Farrah Fawcett could endure what she later endured, you have to understand what a strict Catholic upbringing in small-town Texas does to a person. It builds something in you, a spine, a sense of right and wrong that does not bend easily just because the world is asking it to. Rules were not optional in that house. Dignity was not negotiable. And yet inside all that structure, something kept trying to get out. By the age of 5, she was winning local art contests. Not participation ribbons. Winning. Drawing and sculpting with a focus that people around her found almost unsettling for someone so small. That creative hunger would stay with her for the rest of her life, and it would eventually become the part of her story that surprises people the most. But we will get to that. By the time she reached W.B. Ray High School, the town had already begun to notice her in a different way. All 4 years of high school, she was voted most beautiful by her classmates. Not once, every single year. And before you file that away as a simple fact about a pretty girl, consider what it actually means to carry that title in a small conservative town where beauty is both celebrated and suspected. Where being noticed can feel as much like a warning as a gift. She was disciplined. Her teachers remembered her focus. She had that quality that only becomes clear in retrospect, when people look back after the fame and say they always knew. But knowing and understanding are different things, and nobody around her in Corpus Christi fully understood what was building inside her. In 1965, a beauty scholarship took her to the University of Texas at Austin. She arrived with a plan. Microbiology, a science degree, a respectable, sensible future that her parents could understand. She joined a sorority. She settled into campus life. And then a Hollywood publicist happened to see her photograph in a campus newspaper feature about the most beautiful students on campus. And everything that Farrah had carefully planned dissolved in an instant. Because that is how these moments work. They do not arrive with fanfare. They arrive quietly, almost accidentally, and then they change everything. But what the public never fully understood was what she gave up to say yes to that moment. And what it cost her to say yes to the next one and the one after that. She left the university in 1967 and moved to Los Angeles with more hope than she had safety nets. Her parents were not cheering from the sidelines. They were worried. This was not the plan. And Los Angeles, as it always does with young women who arrive believing in themselves, tested her first. Casting rooms said no. Auditions led nowhere. She took work where she could find it. Print ads, shampoo commercials, the grinding, invisible labor of someone trying to become seen in a city full of people trying to become seen. There is something deeply important in that period of her life that the world tends to skip over because it is not glamorous. But it built in her something that the glamour years could not have built on their own. A tolerance for rejection, a stubbornness about her own worth, a refusal to let the city define her on its terms. And then, slowly, it began to shift. By the end of 1968, she had appeared in over 100 television commercials. Max Factor, Noxzema, one after another, her face becoming familiar in American living rooms without anyone quite knowing her name yet. People called her the girl next door, which was meant as a compliment but which she privately found limiting, because she already knew she was something more than that. And here is where the story starts to get interesting in ways that the standard telling always glosses over. Playboy came calling. Other offers came too, offers that would have made her a household name overnight. She said no to all of them. Agents pressured her. The industry had a very specific idea of what a young woman with her face should be willing to do to accelerate her career, and she looked at that idea and she said no. Not once. Repeatedly. Cost her jobs. Cost her momentum. But it also meant that when she finally did become famous, she became famous entirely on her own terms. That distinction mattered enormously to her, and it matters enormously to understanding why her story resonates so differently now than it did then. Her first real brush with Hollywood chaos came through a film called Myra Breckenridge in 1970, a production so troubled and so explicit that she would later describe it as the sleaziest project Hollywood had ever produced. She felt pushed into it. She felt used by it. And when it failed, she felt the particular humiliation of having gambled your dignity on something that could not even hold itself together. But here is what nobody tells you about that period. The failure did not stop her. Clarified her. It showed her exactly what she did not want, which is sometimes the most important knowledge a person can have. The years between 1970 and 1976 were years of accumulation. Guest roles on television. Small parts. A growing sense of her own power that the industry kept trying to contain. And then in 1976, two things happened that would define her public identity for the rest of her life, and both of them contain truths that the world is only now beginning to sit with properly. The first was a photograph. A red swimsuit. A beach. A photographer named Bruce McBroom who captured something in her face that went beyond beauty into something almost mythological. Over 12 million copies of that poster sold. 12 million. It became the best-selling poster in American history. And while the world celebrated, Farrah felt quietly horrified. Not by the image itself, but by what it did to the way people looked at her. She began slipping her own sculptures into later photo shoots, trying to redirect the gaze toward her mind. Trying to say, there is more here than what you are looking at. Nobody noticed. And that quiet frustration would drive the second half of her life in ways that are only now being fully appreciated. The second thing that happened in 1976 was Charlie's Angels. When the show premiered on September 22nd of that year, it pulled in nearly 60% of television viewers by the end of its first season. 60%. Nearly the entire country was watching her. She was earning $5,000 per episode while her face sold millions of dollars worth of products she would never see a cent from. Lunchboxes, board games, dolls. An entire economy built on her image while she sat in an 18-hour shooting day and came home to a marriage that was quietly cracking under the weight of her own success. But what the public did not see was even more shocking than any of that. She was fighting for her scripts to be better. She was asking for Jill Monroe to be written as something more than a beautiful woman in a dangerous situation. She was watching the producers choose her image over her intelligence, week after week, and she was building toward a decision that would stun Hollywood so completely that they would spend years trying to destroy her for it. In 1977, after one season and only 8 episodes, Farrah Fawcett walked away from Charlie's Angels. She walked away from a contract worth $7 million. She walked away from the most famous role on American television. And she did it because she had done the math that nobody else was willing to do. Her poster alone had earned her $400,000 in royalties that year, more than her entire season salary. She was asking for 10% of merchandising profits instead of the 2% she was receiving. They said no, and so she left. The retaliation was immediate and severe. The $13 million lawsuit, whisper campaigns, the slow, deliberate closing of doors. Hollywood did not forgive stars who understood their own value clearly enough to demand it out loud. She paid for that clarity for years, but she had planted a seed that would eventually grow into something the industry could not ignore. Every actor today who negotiates merchandising rights owes something to what Farrah Fawcett did in 1977. The years that followed were harder than most people remember. Films that failed. Roles that did not fit. A marriage to Lee Majors that ended not with drama, but with the quiet exhaustion of two people whose ambitions had grown in opposite directions. He had wanted her smaller. She had refused. By 1982 it was over. And then there was Ryan O'Neal. A love story so complicated and so painful and so enduring that it almost defies easy description. Nearly 30 years of on and off, of deep connection and betrayal, of a son named Redmond born in 1985 who became both their greatest joy and their greatest heartbreak. The moment that changed everything, though, was not a romance. It was a television movie that aired on October 8, 1984, called The Burning Bed. She played Francine Hughes, a real woman who had set her abusive husband on fire after years of violence. To prepare, Farrah let herself be locked in a closet for 30 minutes to feel the specific texture of that fear. She sat in hardback chairs through courtroom scenes to mirror her character's physical discomfort. The climactic scream was done in a single take and left the entire crew standing in silence. When it aired, America saw something they were not prepared for. She was not the girl from the poster. She was not the woman with the hair. She was an actress, a real one, Emmy-nominated, fearless, finally visible in the way she had always deserved to be. And that is the Farrah Fawcett that 2025 is rediscovering. Not the icon, not the image, the woman, the one who fought the studio system before most people knew it needed fighting. The one who documented her own cancer battle on camera not for sympathy but because she wanted to show the world what the disease actually looks like so that other people fighting it in private would feel less alone. Nearly 9 million people watched that documentary. 9 million people saw the hair gone, the hospital visits, the sleepless nights, the reality hidden behind the polished version that fame demands. She died on June 25, 2009 in Santa Monica, with Ryan O'Neal beside her. Her foundation went on to raise more than $10 million for cancer research. Her sculptures sold at auction in late 2025 for $500,000, shocking people who had never known she made art at all. A memoir released in November of that year revealed that in her final days, she had wanted to spend her last hours near the ocean. That wish was denied. And when that detail surfaced, something shifted in the public conversation around her. Something quiet and enormous at the same time, because it was the detail that finally made people understand the full shape of her life. A woman who spent decades being told what she was allowed to be, what she was worth, where she could go and how much of herself she was permitted to show, right up until the very end. And who, despite all of it, left behind a foundation, a body of art, a legal precedent, a documentary that changed how people talk about illness, and a legacy that somehow keeps growing larger the more honestly people are willing to look at it. That is why everyone is suddenly talking about Farrah Fawcett again. Not because of the poster, because of everything the poster was always hiding.